Hi guys, welcome to my car. So, the title of today's video is You Can Bake from Scratch and Never Look Back. And so today I'm going to be giving you a little bit of backstory about kind of my journey in the kitchen and what happened and when I was able to basically cultivate the skill of baking. So I know that baking is something that kind of freaks a lot of people out as far as actually being able to do it. I feel like it's something, just from personal experience, from friends that I've had that have told me this and things like that, that it's something that either you kind of know how to do it or you are ground zero on it. It's scary. It's intimidating. I know there is at least one person watching this video. I will not call you out by name, but I know you're watching it. And this has absolutely no bearing on you because you are amazing at baking and you don't need to know anything about any of this. But there are some of us who are not there yet. But that's the thing, it's not being there yet. It doesn't mean that you're never going to be able to bake or that you're never going to be able to bake from scratch or anything like that. So just kind of dive in and I'll give you my backstory on this. But before I do, please consider giving the video a like. Leave me a comment if there's anything that I touch on that, kind of speaks to you, or anything that gives you more ideas, and consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. Thank you. Okay, now that my advertisement is done. So I've been baking for like 20 years. I figured it out today while I was at work and I was like, okay, so I've been baking since this age and I'm this age this year. So I've been baking for 20 years, guys. So as far as my baking journey, I did start baking at a fairly young age, and it was baking that I started with. It was not cooking, it was baking. Cooking was just kind of a back burner thing. I would say that I like both equally now, and I don't necessarily feel like they have to be different. I feel like a lot of just what's out there basically tells you, well, maybe you can cook, but you can't bake, or you can bake, but you can't cook. And I don't get that. Like, I don't see why you can't do both. Maybe they're a little bit different, but you're still working with food. And if you understand how to work with food in one aspect, it shouldn't be that hard for you to learn how to work with food in another aspect. That's Maddy's sense. I don't know if it makes anybody else sense. So, started with baking, and when I started as far as like cake making, it was box cake mixes. Box cake mixes, box brownie mixes. I think that I maybe always kind of made cookies from scratch. I'm sure that I made them from a box mix as well, but I think like the cookies I kind of made from scratch. Muffins and things like that would be box mixes. Now, maybe I would do something like add an extra ingredient in to make it a little bit more special, a little bit more unique, but the bottom line was I was using a box mix. I wasn't actually like baking from scratch. But the thing is with me and baking and cooking, and really any time that I'm spending time in the kitchen, it's coming from a really idealistic place. And if you look up that definition, you should be able to kind of pinpoint what I'm getting at. I kind of have like this idea in my head of what I want something to be, and I have an idea in my head of what I want to be. And the baking and the cooking, it just kind of fits into that ideal. I really, really love like the 40s and 50s retro, like not demeaning, but like that time frame of a woman's place is in the home, like, and being a good homemaker and actually cultivating those skills. To me, I just grew up really liking that and kind of idealizing that and wanting to be that girl that vacuums in pearls and high heels. And I didn't see anything wrong with that. Obviously, I have a job, so I don't see anything wrong with that either. But, you know, it's like that ideology, okay, there it is, of just like providing for your family in that way. And, you know, that's a role. That's something that needs to be filled somewhere. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on this. I innately in my heart feel like it is my job as a wife to make sure that my family, which is only Nathan and 2 cats, but still, to make sure that my family is properly fed things that are healthy, and fed things that are delicious. And that includes baking, because who doesn't love sweet stuff? So that's cakes, that's cookies, that's muffins that I can send to Nathan's job with him. You know, to me, it's just something I love to do. But anyway, I'm sorry, I got a little bit off topic there, but that was really just to describe to you where I'm coming from in my head when I'm in the kitchen. It's really a place of, this is actually something that I really want to cultivate, that I really want to be able to do. And I take pride in that. Not like a boastful pride, but as far as my like self-worth or whatever, to me, I feel like I have self-worth if I'm putting out homemade dinners, if I'm able to make a cake for us every week, or cookies, you know, things like that. I just feel better if I am able to put food on the table for us that way. So that's where I'm coming from, and that's why I've worked so hard to try and cultivate being a good baker and being a good cook, because if I didn't have that in me, then I really wouldn't care. It would be okay if we ate every meal out and things like that, but it's just, to me, that's my role. So, as far as the actual journey and progression of that and how I kind of came into a better baking knowledge, as I said, I did start at a young age with the box mixes, and I wouldn't say that that's a bad place to start. I would never go back to it now, but it gave me at least an idea of what things I'm looking for, what I'm trying to accomplish in something that's homemade. So it at least gave me like a baseline for it. And if you're able to do something from a box mix, you can really only go up from there. So like I said, I believe I kind of always did cookies from scratch. That wasn't a super hard thing for me to do from scratch, except for the one time I distinctly remember making peanut butter cookies, and somehow or another I ended up leaving out the flour. They were not supposed to be flourless peanut butter cookies, but they ended up being flourless peanut butter cookies. They got really dark and they were really chewy, but they were very delicious. Never been able to recreate that. Not really sure that I want to. That was towards the beginning of things, but that was definitely one of my stumbles along the way. And so cookies, kind of always from scratch. Cakes, though, I feel like my biggest kind of growth progression that I could see happened with cake making. So as I said, I would always make cakes from the box. I might add something into them, but it was always coming from the box. And in a kind of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it move, at one point I remember thinking, okay, well, I want to try to make a cake from scratch. So I got my little recipe and I tried to make a cake from scratch, and I was not impressed, like not impressed at all. It was heavy, it was dense, it wasn't light and fluffy, it wasn't, you know, what you expect to come from a cake box. Basically, it wasn't a cake box. And I think that I tried that twice. I think because I like kind of realized, you know, maybe I just like did something wrong. And so I tried another recipe, and I just kind of felt like if I can't produce something that's as good as the box cake mix, why even try? So I think I went on that path of why even try for a cake mix for years. And what kind of eventually got me off of that is the fact that somewhere along the line in my mind, I stopped thinking that it was okay to do things through a box. Not that I'm saying you can't ever make something from a box mix, or even that I'm saying that I don't ever, rarely, but I, you know, eventually sometimes you'll make something from a bag or a box. It's easier. But just like inherently, I somehow or another came upon this feeling that if you're making something from scratch, it's automatically got to be better for you than if you're making something from a box. And I mean, some of that's just preservatives or what have you. Cakes aren't really like good for you food. They're never going to be a good for you food. But I just felt like if I'm making it from scratch, if I'm making it, I'm controlling the ingredients, the quality of the ingredients, it's automatically got to be healthier for me. If I'm going to eat a cake, it's gotta be healthier for me to make the cake myself as opposed to making the cake from a box mix. So somewhere in there, I took on that mentality, and I really didn't feel proud of myself. This goes back to the ideology thing. I didn't feel proud of myself if what I was putting out was coming from a box. Like, what did I do? I cracked a couple eggs. I put some oil in a box cake mix and threw it in the oven. To me, that wasn't enough. If I was going to be proud of what I was putting forth, I knew that I needed to be able to make it myself. So coming from that standpoint, I tried the cake. Excuse me. For some reason, I was thinking muffin. Maybe I started with a muffin. I don't know. So I tried the cake mix again, and somehow this time it clicked and it worked, and I was able to make a cake from scratch, and I was able to make muffins from scratch, and I was able to make brownies from scratch. I don't really make brownies that much, but I was able to make these things from scratch, and I felt good about it because, you know, I was excited. I was actually putting in the work, and in hindsight, I don't feel like it's that much more work. It is a little bit. It is a little bit more work than a box mix, but I don't feel like it's so much extra work that you can't do it. Now, as I was thinking about making this video for you guys, I was thinking about the first time that I made the cakes from scratch and thinking about things that I might have done wrong. It's very, very possible that I did not listen to the recipe properly and I didn't put things in the right method, maybe didn't cream the butter to the right stage, things like that. Or it very possibly could have just been a bad recipe. There are bad recipes out there. Just because a recipe is posted on the internet or even in a book doesn't make it a good recipe. Maybe it's been tested and tried for that person, and maybe it works for that person. Doesn't mean it's going to work for me. So after the fact, I've learned how to look for recipes that are good recipes, and be able to see, does this recipe have enough of this thing in it to make it good? Things like that. And that's kind of just something that you learn over doing things. And sometimes I'll look at a recipe and I'll try it and it'll be terrible. And I'll be like, I can fix this. And I'll try it again and I'll do things to fix it. Or other times I'll try it and it's terrible. And I'm like, this is just inherently not a good recipe. In order to fix it, there's just too much wrong with it. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just me. But that's kind of what I look at in recipes. Sometimes kitchen fails aren't our fault. Sometimes it's a faulty recipe. Sometimes we can fix it. And sometimes you just need to scrap it and move on. So when I started kind of like my baking journey, it was really hard for me emotionally, which is weird, but because I was kind of linking my self-worth to it, I would go into the kitchen with this idea that I was going to come out with something awesome and beautiful and everybody was going to think it was fantastic, and then something would go wrong, and it was like I had kitchen bipolar disorder, because I would go from super happy and super excited to super sad and down about it. Now, that's been several years ago, so I do want to say that my life has changed a lot, and not just on a baking journey, but the reason that I'm telling you that is because I understand that experience. So I understand how you can go in with expectations that everything's going to be great, and then something goes wrong and it makes you really sad. So I just want you to know that that can be an element, and if something does go wrong, just try to look at it objectively and think of it from a critical thinking standpoint, and not necessarily blame yourself for why that went wrong. Even if it's something you did, to just kind of take your mind out of that, just put it aside and try again another day. Baking from scratch is amazing. It's so good. So to actually finish up my cake baking journey story, I then started baking from scratch consistently, where I really was not using baking mixes, but somebody had given me a cake mix and I had it in the back of our pantry. And I don't know if we moved or I was going through the pantry or what exactly happened, but I was like, okay, we need to just get this out of here. If I make it, then I don't really have to put in the extra effort this week. So I made us this yellow cake mix from a box. And I honestly was expecting that it was going to somehow taste like magical, that it was going to be so much lighter and fluffier and just way better than anything that I could make, because I remembered that experience before where I felt like the box cake mix was so much better than my cake. We tried that cake mix and it was not amazing. My cakes, I feel like, had more flavor. I don't know about the lightness. Maybe it had a little bit more lightness to it, but to be honest, I usually don't use cake flour for my cakes. So if there's a lightness issue, like if I just used cake flour, it would probably fix that. And so all the while, me still expecting it to be way better than my cakes, Nathan sits there and he eats it and he goes, "Your cakes are way better than this." And I was like, yes, I beat it. I beat the box cake system. It was a small win, but I remember it. It was a big win for me. And honestly, I really feel like with a little bit of effort behind it, you can bake from scratch and you don't have to look back. And like, you feel so good when you actually bake something from scratch because it's a part of you. Like, you're putting that out there and you're able to give that to people. And then when they compliment you on it, they're not complimenting Duncan Hines. They're not complimenting Betty Crocker. They're actually complimenting you. And that's exciting. Like, that's really, really fun. And let me tell you, my favorite thing about baking from scratch is you can do whatever you want. Like, you can take a recipe and you can pretty much follow it. But if there's something you want to change, you can do that. If you want to substitute an ingredient, whether it is for health concerns or just you prefer something else, you can do that. Like, you don't have that option with a prepackaged mix. I mean, yeah, you can change the eggs or maybe change the milk or what have you, but for the most part, what's in there is in there. And if you have higher quality standards for your food, then you control what is going into that recipe. But not just like the basic stuff, not just like the flour is better, or the eggs are better, or the milk is better. You control the flavor. Like, you can do anything you want. So there's this recipe for a, they called it a frosting, but I use it as a cake filling, and it's so good. It's like a French silk pie filling, but in a frosting form. Guys, this recipe is so, so good. But because it was based on a French silk pie filling, it was originally like a bittersweet chocolate, which I tried and I loved it. But because I can do whatever I want, I now make that recipe with any kind of chocolate that I want. It can be white chocolate, it can be milk chocolate, it can be dark chocolate. If I really wanted to get fancy, I could throw in all those extra chocolates that they're making now, like the blonde chocolate and the pink chocolate and all that stuff. So that's what's fun about doing something from scratch, is like, you are in control. If you have an idea, you can do it. I made a chocolate orange cake just because somebody had given us a chocolate orange. I don't even like the combination of chocolate and orange, but I thought it would be fun to try it, so I did. It wasn't bad. It would be better if I liked the combination of chocolate and orange, but like, you can get inspired about anything and you can make a creation for that. Or if there's a specific flavor that you like and it's not really in a lot of mainstream things, you can add that in. You can make a chocolate and cardamom cake. You can make a chocolate chai tea cake. You can do anything. And it's so much fun. I love planning cakes. It's funny because since like cookies were the thing that I really got started on, you would think that I'd be more passionate about cookies, but honestly, it's cakes. I love cakes, and I love to come up with ideas for putting cakes together, because to me, it's just like getting dressed. So when I get dressed, usually there's one thing that I know that I want to wear, and then I kind of match up everything else with whatever that one thing is. So maybe it's a skirt or a top, and based on whatever it is, then my skirt or my pants or whatever have to match with that top, and my shoes have to match with it. Sometimes it's that I want to wear a particular pair of shoes and I have to find an outfit to correlate with that. But basically, there's like three things that I'm putting together. Well, it's the same way with a cake. So a cake to me is the cake itself and whatever flavor that's going to be, whatever the filling's going to be, and then whatever the frosting is going to be. So it's like the same concept to me as getting dressed in the morning is, what do I want? So I find that focal point flavor that I want, whether that's the filling or the frosting or the cake, and then I match the other pieces to it. And I mean, that's just me. Not everybody works that way, surely, but it gets me excited. It gets me excited about getting in the kitchen to try something new. And sometimes it doesn't work. But once you get the basics of baking under your, I almost said under your skin, but I don't think that's the right terminology. But once you get that understanding of how things come together and what steps you have to take for things, it's just like in The Sound of Music. It's do, re, mi, because you have the basic underlying parts of things, but then you can add in whatever you want and you can make something that's uniquely you. And so that's the part about baking that is really so fun. You have the control. You can do whatever it is that you want to do. And if it fails, like, what is your definition of fail? If you completely scorch something and burn down the house, that would be a fail. But, maybe it's just not amazing. But you can kind of take notes from that and figure out if you can make it amazing or like what you can add to make it better. So like, failure isn't as big a deal as we make it out to be. Like, sometimes you can just obliterate your kitchen and burn everything. And other times it's just a matter of maybe you just didn't get the flavoring quite right. But every time you do something, you learn. Like, that's the thing. So if you just get in the kitchen more, if you just try a little bit more, you learn every step of the way. Every time you do something, it's like adding up skills, just like in a video game. Like, it's increasing your experience level and you're seeing what you did wrong and you're knowing how to fix it now. When I first made those cakes from scratch, I'm thinking that I probably could have sifted the flour. Maybe I didn't do that. I may have overmeasured the flour, and I probably didn't know when I was first starting out about how to add the wet ingredients into the dry ingredients, because there is, in most cake recipes, a way that you do that. You don't add them all at the same time. There are some recipes that are an exception to this, but you generally don't add them all at the same time, like all of the wet ingredients and all of the dry ingredients. You add them in parts so that you don't overmix them. Even if I did that, even if I listened to that, I probably ended up overmixing it. So, there were probably reasons why those first two cakes failed, but I really just didn't give myself enough time to learn how to fix it. And so that's, I guess, more or less what I'm getting at is, I don't want you to feel like you have to waste a ton of time in the kitchen, but as I said, every time you do something, it's going to get a little bit better. You're going to learn a little bit more. And you can try it with different recipes. It doesn't have to be the exact same thing. And again, what is your definition of failure? Because how far can you fail with a cookie or a cake? Like, even if it's a disaster, most of the time, unless you replaced the sugar with the salt, which I did before, and that is a terrible thing to do, like, you can still eat it. It's still good. I mean, our palates are not that special that like we can't eat something that's not phenomenal, but it's pretty good. Just bury it under some ice cream. Like, you're fine. You're fine. Just lower your expectation of what failure is and give yourself time to learn. Give yourself time to play around with it and figure out what to do. So that being said, you can bake from scratch, even if you haven't done it before, even if you're scared to get in the kitchen. Guys, baking is flour, eggs, sugar, and butter. Those ingredients are normal ingredients. It's nothing to be scared of, and you can learn how to work with them. And once you do, it opens up this whole new world for you. So it's totally worth it. It's totally worth it to get into the kitchen and try again if you've tried already and had a failure. And if you have questions, I'm here. Like, if something fails miserably, most of my subscribers at this point have my phone number. So you can just call me and we can cry about cake together, because I have done that before as well. Or I can try and tell you how to fix it. So, you know, it's okay. Get in there, try it. And if something bad happens, just move along and, you know, try it again when you're feeling a little bit stronger about it in the future. Baking is fun. And this month, we're going to be talking more about baking, and I'm going to be showing you some of the basics, and I'm going to be showing you some of my recipes, so you'll be able to see what things should look like. So hopefully that'll be an experience you enjoy. If you have any questions, if you have any concerns, if I freaked you out about anything, you can leave me a comment and let me know. But I really hope that I inspired you. We all have a starting point. We don't just come into the world knowing how to bake. Even if that is a skill or a talent that is given to us from the Lord, we still have to use it to be able to actually cultivate it and make it what it should be. So don't feel like your starting place is worse than anybody else's starting place. You are talking to a girl who left flour out of cookies. How do you leave flour out of cookies? To this day, I don't know how I left flour out of cookies. I don't know how salt ended up in my pumpkin pies instead of sugar. I don't know these things. I cried last year over a cake failure. It happens, but the reward is definitely worth the risk. And I mean, even if you fail miserably, even if you do burn the cake, it was a few eggs and some butter and some milk and some flour. They're all fairly cheap ingredients, so there's not actually a whole lot of risk, and there is the potential for a whole lot of reward. So have a good night, guys.